As the Democratic presidential campaigns began announcing their fourth quarter fundraising estimates, it seems nobody could compete with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. According to the Sanders camp, the presidential hopeful raised $34.5 million. That's the strongest quarter of any Democratic presidential candidate in 2019.
So how did he do it, and what is he going to do with all that money? According to Intercept DC Bureau Chief Ryan Grimm, Sanders has a unique organizational strategy, but does leaning so heavily into this strategy give Sanders an edge, or is it a gamble? Ryan Grimm joins us now to expand on all of this. Great to see you.
Good
Happy
to see
New
you.
Year.
Good to see you, Ryan.
New Year.
So everybody loves to tout their ground game, but
Right.
your piece really digs into, no, he actually is doing something sort of different and unique here. Just lay out those pieces.
Yeah, and he's doing something that I call on the one hand a gamble, but also possibly the only path he has to the nomination. Because the Democratic primary electorate, as it currently exists, it's whiter, it's wealthier, and it's more risk averse than the Democratic primary, than the Democratic Party as a whole. Just
Right.
And the non-voters. So
And we keep shifting it more and more in that direction,
Right.
by the way.
Right. And so his idea is like the only way that a Democratic Socialist is going to win the party nomination is by expanding the electorate, by changing this electorate. He's very explicit about that on the trail. But what I looked at is, okay, how's he actually planning on doing that? So he has a fairly unique, not utterly unique, but a fairly unique advantage, which is millions of people willing to not just give money, as we saw, $18 a pop, raising $34.5 million, but willing to do things. So then the question in 2016 for his campaign was, how do we put these people to work? They didn't really have enough time to put it together by the time Iowa came around. But he brought back a lot of the team that did his 2016 organizing kind of in the background and made him the centerpiece of the organizing operation. And so they've been at this for 4 years now, more or less. And so the question is, can you actually take volunteers and turn them into campaign workers that are actually driving people out to the polls? And so I write about a bunch of different interesting things that they're doing. To me, the most interesting was this thing called precinct mapping that they're only rolling out in Iowa, but they're going to expand elsewhere and hasn't been reported before. Basically, you give a volunteer a list of everybody in their neighborhood and say, ID these people. So you send people out knocking on doors, that's great, but you hit 4 or 5 doors an hour.
It's very inefficient
Yeah,
if
it's
you've
very
ever done it before.
Yeah. And half the
You have to knock on the right doors.
right, and half the doors are going to lie to you. Sure, I love Bernie.
Yeah.
Like, great. Right, and then the next person comes, I love Buttigieg.
Right.
I love Warren. You just come on, go.
Yeah, get off my doorstep.
They've done studies, and you're about 93% accurate in identifying where your friends and your family stand, which is intuitive. If you think about who you know in your life, say, yeah, that person's for Bernie, they're for Bernie, they could be for Bernie. Oh, they definitely are not for Bernie. And so you give them this list of people in the neighborhood, and they just go through, bang, 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 bang. And so they're finding this exponential growth in identifying their supporters. And studies also show that you're much more likely to go out and caucus or vote if a friend or a family member pressures you to do so. If you get a text from a Bernie bot, that's great. Good to know that it's election day, but okay, well,
Yeah.
good enough. But if you get it from your aunt, you're like, she's going to know.
Yeah.
She's going to know if I came out.
Gotta get the sticker.
If she doesn't see that sticker, you're going to get screwed. It's interesting, Ryan, because this is actually, I think, the biggest deficit that the Democrats had going in up against the Republican Party, which invested hundreds of millions of dollars in their data operation. Do you see this as the counter to that, as into using his organizing network? And what's interesting from my perspective is I bet that the National Party doesn't really love this because they don't control the levers by which he is able to use his organizing power, whereas that very much is the case with the Trump campaign.
The National Party has convinced itself that it's not worth it. And they can find political scientists who will tell them that you're just not going to do it. But you're not, and it's true, if you are Joe Biden, then this strategy might not actually work for you because people are not fired up to go out and volunteer for you and then find people who are going to go out and vote for you. And what I like about the Sanders approach to it is that they kind of turn the ideas of turnout and persuasion on their head. Persuasion is thought of like, okay, you like Warren, let me explain to you why you should actually like Bernie. And turnout is like, you already like Bernie, I'm going to convince you that you need to make sure that you come out. But what the campaign says is, no, that's not right. You actually need to persuade people to come out because it's a decision to not vote. And it's a decision rooted in both emotion and rationality that is completely reasonable. As AOC put it in one rally in Las Vegas, she said, people don't want to give their consent to be governed by nonsense. So it's kind of an emotional protest against a broken system. And so you have to persuade the person, no, trust us. Suspend your disbelief just for 2 days, the primary and the general. Just come out and vote. Yeah, you agree with me on the issues, but they don't actually agree with Bernie on the question of whether or not the system can be fixed.
Yeah.
And understandably so.
That's the
and so what they're saying, no, here's why I believe that Bernie is the best candidate. They focus on their own stories a lot. And they're just trying to bring as much social pressure to bear on people to persuade them to get out.
Here's the thing I keep turning over in my mind. I mean, Sanders has all this energy, all these donors, all this organizing capacity. They learned so much from 2016. They're capturing the people they weren't able to capture last time. You've got that on one hand. On the other hand, you have Biden, who fairly weak on fundraising in terms of, being a quote-unquote front runner. Very little demonstrated energy, very little energy online, very little energy in terms of volunteers, and yet he's at the top of the polls. Right. I mean, which one of those things ultimately balances out? Because I kind of turn it over in my mind every day and go back and forth on which ultimately wins.
Right, and we're going to find out. And ultimately, it might be the case that no amount of sophisticated organizing and campaigning can overcome fundamentals. And I think that's just true.
I do.
Like, let's say you're Dennis Kucinich and you have the best organized campaign ever.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. The fundamentals are so strongly against you. So then the question is Sanders within striking distance? Is he within the realm of possibility? And the electorate that he's running in is the worst possible for him. Because I mentioned the demographics, but specifically the idea that so many Democrats are just hell-bent on beating Trump. And you can give them all the polls that have ever been conducted that show that Bernie Sanders will beat Trump. They just don't want to believe it. They could see polls that Howard Dean is going to beat George W. Bush in 2004. They didn't believe it. To them, John Kerry was the guy that they needed.
Who makes them believe that?
The media tells them over and over again.
I mean, it's 40 years of kind of propaganda from the Democratic establishment, but it's also, the years in the wilderness since the Reagan era. Since 1980, Democrats have felt rejected. They have felt like the hippies and the civil rights movement went too far for these American people that they don't understand. And so therefore, we need to be as boring as possible so that the rest of the country doesn't hate us. And along comes Joe Biden, and like
that's the guy. That's the one.
So it might just be the case that the structural obstacles are too high, which is why he's investing so heavily into bringing out new people who have no investment in Joe Biden or the entire kind of pathology of the last 30 years of Democratic disarray. They just don't believe the system itself is worth participating in. So you're trying to persuade them to come out. Because there is something even almost poignant about the depth and the strength of Bernie Sanders' support. Because millions of people are being told constantly, he can't win. Nothing can ever get better. We can't have nice things. And millions of people are like, no, I believe we can.
And they still giving him money. That's what really
gets me. Still giving him money, still organizing. Still going out to house parties.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of new donors in this last quarter, which I think is maybe the most important stat of all. Really fascinating piece, great reporting. If he does end up shocking everyone and winning or even outperforming, this will be the reason why.
Yeah, this is it.
That's right. Thanks, Ryan.
Great to see you.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.